So Help Wanted is Adele's second book. Her first book, The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P., was named one of the best books by The New Yorker, The Economist, The New Republic, NPR, Slate, Book Forum, Guardian, amongst others. Okay. So Help Wanted, and I'm sure you're gonna be talking about this, but it's, you know of what you write in this book. When your daughter was 21 months old, you wake up at 2:30 a.m. to nurse her, shower, and head off to work. That's right. I read it. To drive from your home in Rhinebeck to an unnamed big box store across the Hudson, and you would have a 4 to 8 a.m. shift. That's right. So, so it's the work experience that provided the inspiration for this book. So everyone, please welcome Adelle Waldman.
Wow. I mean, that was lovely. I'm gonna have to compensate if you stolen some of my thunder. I'm gonna have the 2:30 wake up. So, but hi, thank you guys all for coming, for being here for this lovely festival, and thank you to Doreen and Kim and Maria. It's just lovely to be here. I don't think you guys knew this when you asked me to come, but I lived in this area many years ago. From 2001 to 2002, I lived in West Haven, and I worked in the Media and Register. It was I was young, I was 23 maybe, and it was the first of several newspaper jobs I had, and I loved it, but I wanted someone who became a journalist. Also, am I talking loud enough? Okay, great. I became a journalist with the idea that it was going to be a day job, because what I really wanted to be was a novelist. So I probably haven't been into this bookstore since then. And when I came here then, if I had known that one day I would be asked to come to read from my novel here, I would have been blown away, and I would have been spared many years of worry and anxiety. It's unrealistic fantasy, and so I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, but I am here to talk about the book and not muse about my young self. So, since Doreen set it up so well, I'm just going to read a little bit. I'm not going to read for too long, because I think it can be kind of boring to listen to an author read unless they're a very talented reader, and I'll do my best. But I do like to, before I read, just ground people a little bit with what Doreen said, that this is a book that is set almost entirely at a big box store. It's about the people who work in the back of the store. They arrive in the middle of the night to unload the trucks of new merchandise and put the items onto the sales floor by the time the store opens at 8 a.m. So I'm just going to read the first few pages that it will just give a bit of a sense of the setting and the characters and the tone of the book, and then I'll talk about it some. All right. So, chapter 1. The first hint something was up was so subtle that it barely registered. Just before the start of Monday's 4 a.m. shift, the members of Movement were in the employee area at the front of the store, waiting to clock in. Everyone was there. Everyone, that is, except Meredith, the person at the center of the plot that was soon to take shape. Its reason for being. Nicole turned to Little Will, Movement's group manager. She's still coming back today? Nicole asked. She hasn't been, like, fired? At 23, Nicole was the youngest person in Movement. Nope, answered Little Will. She texted me last night. As if Nicole had demanded proof, he fished his phone from his pocket, tapped its screen several times, and passed the device to her. I'll be a little late tomorrow, read the message from Meredith, boss. I need a little rest after vacay. You know how it is. The words were followed by 2 emojis, a beach ball and a glass of wine. Nicole rolled her eyes. She was about to hand back Little Will's phone when a new text bubble appeared on the screen. She couldn't help but read it. Hey, I've got some news. Could be big for Movement. Coming in now. We'll tell you and Em after the unload. The text was from Big Will, the store manager. Nicole said. She gave the phone back to Little Will, then watched him as he read the text. He was 6'1". He was only called Little Will to distinguish him from Big Will. Big Will was 5'11", but it was his grinning face, captured by a Polaroid, that sat at the top of the org chart taped to the wall of the break room at Town Square store number 1512 in Potterstown, New York. Maybe Meredith really is getting fired, Nicole said when Little Will looked up from his phone. He grinned hopefully. She was pretty, in a fresh-faced, apple-cheeked, straight from the farm way, the kind of dimpled white girl you could picture in the olden days, in a gingham dress and braids as she milked a cow. To tamp down such associations, Nicole slouched, wore baggy t-shirts and boxy pants that sat low on her hips, smoked constantly, avoided both the sun and foods that were heavily processed and or white in color, and generally cultivated an air of boredom and free-floating hostility. Little Will frowned. As a manager, albeit a low-level one, he tried to adhere to certain standards. Let's not jump ahead of ourselves, he said. Nicole looked at him with something close to pity. It wasn't only because he was too nice to talk shit even about Meredith. He'd missed multiple buttons on his shirt. A limp, faded, pill-covered flannel he kept balled up on the passenger seat of his car when he wasn't working. Swatches of white undershirt were visible between buttonholes. Little Will would have been ridiculous if he weren't so good looking. The digits on the two identical time clocks hanging on the opposite wall changed synchronously from 3:54 to 3:55. The text slipped from Nicole's mind as she joined the others. After clocking in, a few people went to the sales floor. The rest headed to the warehouse. Movement was responsible for unloading the trucks that came from Town Square's corporate distribution center in western Pennsylvania, and for getting the merchandise onto the store shelves. Nicole, who was in the warehouse group, walked with the others through the quiet store to aisle E26, light bulbs, all the way in the back. At the end of the aisle, they passed through a set of double doors, marked employees only. The warehouse was even more dungeon-like than usual. With sunrise still a ways off, its small, dirty skylights were useless. The half dozen or so bare bulbs that hung from the high ceiling only dented the gloom. The air was thick and warm. There was never any AC back here, but with the store closed to customers, the HVAC system was on eco mode. No occasional blasts of cooled air wafted in from the sales floor. The truck was parked ass out in the first of the warehouse's 3 loading docks. Every few seconds, high-pitched squeals tore through the dark space. The line, a long metal track that ferried merchandise through the warehouse, needed oiling. Milo and Diego had arrived before the others to set up. Milo was already in position, standing just inside the truck, and was raring to go, rotating his arm from their shoulder sockets, like a pitcher warming up. Milo was the thrower. His job was to transfer boxes from the truck onto the line, then push them to the next person, who scanned them. At store number 1512, this was Nicole. If her scanner said a box held backstock, she drew a slash on its label with a Sharpie before pushing the box down the line. Downstream from her, Travis, Raymond, Diego, Val, and the old guys were spread out along the line. Each one was responsible for picking certain categories of boxes off the line and putting them onto pallets waiting by their feet. Boxes that weren't theirs, they pushed to the next person until the truck was empty. Without waiting for the old guys to get to their posts at the back of the line, Milo began pushing boxes down the track. Nicole's scanner intoned dully, beep, 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 as it hovered over a microwave, a box of DVDs, a bundle of 6 swim noodles tied together with twine, which, for some reason, who knew or cared, elicited a longer and higher pitched squawk. Nicole fell into a steady, almost somnambulant rhythm, and she scanned and pushed. There came a cordless vacuum cleaner, an infant car seat, several packages of paper towels fused together with shrink wrap, a box containing tubs of protein powder, an office chair, a dollhouse, kitty litter, curtain rods, an air conditioner, a box of mixed HBA, health and beauty aids, a flat screen TV, baby wipes, a box of individually packaged microwavable bowls of organic mac and cheese, 2 Blu-ray players, a convection oven, 4 Android cell phones, a crate of jarred pasta sauce, a box of DVDs, a stack of Monopoly sets wrapped in cellophane, a white noise machine, a mixed box of chemical cleaning supplies, a bundle of shrink-wrapped lampshades, more kitty litter, several cases of flavored seltzer water and 12-ounce aluminum cans, tiny cans of gourmet dog food, deodorant, AA batteries, even more kitty litter. For decades, Potterstown had been hemorrhaging people, but judging by the fecal evidence, its cats were flourishing. Dish soap, soap dishes, a drip coffee maker, a Keurig coffee maker, pots for planting, pots for cooking, rubber mats to put in the footwell of a car, crayons, laundry baskets, bookshelves, a half a dozen bound American flags, shampoo, nail polish, wood polish, shoe polish. And I'm gonna leave it there with a litany of consumer goods. So, and I'll confess, I'm used to doing, this book's been out for about a month now, and I've mostly done Q&As with another person, where they ask me questions and I answer them, obviously. So, but for this, the way the event was set up, it was more of a talk, but I am hoping, I'll try to wrap it up fairly soon and we can do audience Q&As, because I think there's a lot to talk about with this book, and sometimes I think it's better if I'm responsive to what you guys want to know. But I'll start with some background. And in fact, I'm gonna go way back. I'm gonna go back to 2001 when I was a pretty recent college graduate, living in this area. And I want to go back to explain how it is that I came to write a novel set at a big box store, because until about 6 years ago, when I worked at the store and started this book, I never really thought I was on the big box novel writing track. Famed path of riches and success. Back when I was young, the kind of novels I thought I would write if I were fortunate enough to get published would be psychological novels about the personal and romantic problems of middle-class people. Many of my favorite novelists, Jane Austen, also George Eliot, Charlotte Bronte, I like 19th century novelists, I should say, Tolstoy, Flaubert, Stendhal, they wrote novels that were first and foremost these very rich character studies, and they often foregrounded topics from personal life, courtship, affairs, that kind of thing. And I thought and continue to think that these are wonderful topics for novels to be about. At the time I felt that I had political opinions, but I thought the novel as a genre was well suited to exploring personal life, and that politics was something largely separate, something that a novelist should engage in the same way anyone else who's not in politics would engage in, just by voting or volunteering or donating money to causes or candidates. And then in 2013, after many years of struggle, I finally published my first novel that was called The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P. And it's about so it's about the love life of a Harvard-educated writer in Brooklyn. Someone who's not rich, but he has a lot of cultural cachet and privilege, and he could be well off if he wanted. And it was a character study and a study of a social world. People a lot like my main character, other expensively educated, sort of ambitious, writerly types. And in many ways, it was the kind of novel I always expected to write. It went deep on psychology and was focused on personal life. So at that point, I felt like everything was going in according to plan in my life. And I had every intention of continuing to write psychological novels as long as anyone would publish them. Then the year 2016 happened. I feel like for many of us, it's an eye-opening year. I feel like given this talk, I keep saying that like nothing's ever seemed quite the same since then. I don't know, I relate to that. But that year, my husband and I moved from Brooklyn to a small town in the Hudson Valley, it's Rhinebeck. We had a daughter born that August, and then in November there was an election. Some of you may remember. All I would say is that my preferred candidate did not win. And I started to feel as if maybe as if I've been living in a bubble even more than I realized. And I guess I had thought until that point, maybe fairly foolishly in a lot of ways, that we lived in a fairly decent society by historical standards. And that it sort of made sense to turn one's attention in their personal life. But just I started to wonder, I started to feel like I didn't know nearly as much as I thought about what was going on. And I was like, came to my attention when I was college to write another psychological novel. And so I got this kind of strange idea to get a low wage job. And this was around the time, by then it's not 2007. Do you remember when the New York Times started doing all those articles where they'd send reporters to diners to talk to Trump voters?
Yeah.
And it's very easy to roll your eyes at it. And I surely did that. But basically, I was just like a New York Times editor who assigned myself that assignment. Like I was like, I wanted to see what's going on in the world a little bit more. And so I got this idea that I'd get a job. And it's not like I never had a low wage job before. I've been a bagger at a grocery store, I've worked at Starbucks, and I've been more than anything else, a waitress. But I'd done all those jobs when I was younger, when I was in high school and college, and then right after. And I hadn't been very interested in the jobs. I just go to work and what I did for money, and all my attention was focused on my social life or dating or school or whatever. So, but when I decided to get a job at this point, I was by then 42 or something like that, 41. I was very interested. I wanted to really pay attention to what was going on, and I we bought of people like Barbara Ehrenreich. She wrote Nickel on Dimes about working a series of low wage jobs, and I thought of the journalist Ted Hanover, who specializes in immersive journalism. He's wrote a book about the prison guard Sing Sing for a year. There are other examples from literature. Zola famously spent 2 weeks visiting the coal mines in northern France and then produced Journal. And I remain so impressed that it only took him 2 weeks to do the research for an excellent novel. I spent 6 months working at a big box store I worked at. Then there's of course Upton Sinclair. But I guess for all these reasons, I think it was a weird thing to do, but maybe not as weird as subsequently it come to feel like it is when I talk about it. But so, it all made sense at the time, I guess. And so anyway, so I get the job. I applied to a number of places, but I actually was lucky enough to get a job at the place I thought was like most iconic, perfect place to work at.
Yeah.
It's in part because I was willing to work these hours at very early morning. And I don't know if anyone here has ever worked at a big box store in the middle of the night, but it turns out it's a really, really rich setting novelistically, just full of both comedy and pathos. If you picture a group of people of all different ages, different races, genders, ethnicities, all hanging out in this dimly lit store, full of all manner of consumer goods, and unpacking them and shooting the shit, and there's just something very atmospheric about it. We had a lot of fun. There's a lot of people were funny. At the same time, the experience was enraging because of the way my coworkers and I were treated. Not because our bosses were so mean, they were fine, but how my coworkers were exploited economically by corporate in ways that are perfectly legal and very commonplace. So most of my coworkers had been at the store for many years, but they were almost all of them, like me, part-time. And because the store, as a cost-cutting measure, had basically stopped hiring full-time workers. You have to be grandfathered in or be a manager to get full-time hours. And to work part-time means that the store has had no obligation to give you a stable number of hours or to adhere to a weekly minimum. This isn't like agreeing with your boss that you're going to work every day from 10 to 3 because you have to pick your kids up from school after that. It's like getting an unpredictable schedule every week. And some weeks you might be scheduled for as little as 1 4-hour shift. And then the next week you'd be asked to work overnights and work as many as 39 hours. Never 40 because the company didn't even want to come close to having to pay overtime. And this was just how it was. My coworkers were used to it. But the unpredictability made their life extremely difficult. Those are more, as much, but probably I'd say more than the low hour, relatively low hourly pay did. If you got a paycheck for a good week's work when you'd work 39 hours, you didn't know if you should save the money, if you should use the money to pay down debt, because everyone had debt. It's impossible not to even living this way. Or should you save it because maybe next week you're only gonna get 4 hours and you won't have enough money for food. A lot of my coworkers didn't have cars because it was impossible to get an auto loan with this unstable pay. They couldn't count on holding on to health insurance that the company did offer, but you had to meet a certain threshold for hours worked per week. And the company could control how many hours you work per week and make sure that you're at, even if you work 39 hours some weeks, that by the end of the year, your average was 24 hours per week and threshold's 25. And it did that. It became the system. While I was there, one of my friends lost his health insurance because he didn't meet that threshold. And it wasn't because the store didn't have enough work. It just his request for more hours would be denied, even as the store would be hiring more seasonal and part-time workers, because this is their preferred system. And not even because this company is particularly evil. It's very typical of a lot of the big box stores, chain retailers today. And one of the reasons I don't name the store is not only because I'm afraid of getting sued. There's a little bit of that, but I think there's a tendency for Walmart, for example, is often used in newspaper stores as an example of a bad employer, and I have no desire to defend Walmart. But I think what that can sometimes do is make it seem like Walmart is this bad apple and the others are all much better. And I think that gives a false picture. Like, I think that the problems I want to talk about in the book are systemic, and so yeah, it's not really this particular company honestly is no worse and in some ways better than some of the others from everything I've learned subsequently. But another issue with part-time work is that it actually perversely makes it harder, not easier, to get a second job or to work a second job, because you don't know your schedule. You don't know how many hours you're going to get the following week. And if you complain about this, if you say you want more hours, the HR person will tell you the best way to get more hours is to increase your availability. But so if you're trying to make yourself more available for your first job, it's very hard to show up for your second job. And it was just an impossible lifestyle. And I guess very quickly into my work in a job, I realized I had found a subject for a novel, that I wanted to write a book that would get at both aspects of what I felt like I experienced. And by both, I mean, there was this comic element, like a richness and a vitality to the store and the people who worked there that I really wanted to get across. At the same time, as I really wanted to convey the nature of what I considered exploitation. And I really came to think, I could be imputing my own cluelessness onto other people, but I came to feel that too many white collar workers have for too long been unaware of what's happened to so many lower wage jobs that I think in the past have been not jobs that would get people rich, but have been more livable and more stable. Like seen in many companies, but a lot of these policies, a lot of the shift to part-time workers and the trying to reduce people's eligibility for benefits, it's just really accelerated in the past 20 years. A lot of it with retail, there's competition from online and an environment where companies are their main incentives are to be profitable, and that means it's hard to be profitable in brick and mortar retail. To reduce labor costs helps you do that, and you get cheered on by stock analysts, by financial press, and that's the world we live in. That's the main incentive. That's what these executives are going for. We call it responsibility to shareholders, but it's sort of who's looking out for what else is happening here. I think we used to have an economy that was more conducive to other values as well, such as having employees who are able to live decent and stable lives. But I'm getting off track, so stick to the less political, stick to the top. Okay. Oh, shoot. Well, the prepared remarks get political too. I guess it won't be a surprise. So to summarize where it's coming from, for a while I wanted to call the novel neoliberalism. A novel. For better or for worse, my agent and my editor talked me out of it. But it probably is a good thing, because the book I ultimately tried to write isn't a polemic. It really is a novel. It's a story, and I hope it's engaging and funny. And that was important to me, just because I also wanted to reflect, again, I keep coming back to the fun of the store and the people I worked with. And I think that it's easy to treat people as if they're entirely victims of exploitation or primarily just poor people. And I didn't want to do that. So I wound up kind of constructing a book that's a comedy. It's something of a dark comedy. But once I knew I wanted to write about the store, I struggled for a while to come up with a plot that would hold the book together. Because a store is just a setting, that wasn't enough. And I think we had just like typical novel plots. One that comes up a lot is a love triangle. But another idea I had was a bad boss, like a really bad boss. There's some, if anyone here has read this book, you've got a bad boss, it's not an evil boss. I was thinking like maybe like a sexual harassing boss, someone doing really bad things. But the problem I kept coming back to is that I was really most interested in writing about the day-to-day life of the store, sort of combination of exploitation and camaraderie. And some of these plots felt external to that, like they'd be taking me away from what I wanted to write about, just adding drama for the sake of drama. So I wanted something that felt more organic. And then there's it's something that was like stuck to the topic of that was about what our economy is like for a lot of people without college degrees who live in sort of hollowed out towns with few other opportunities. And then finally something came to me. I was in my kitchen talking to my husband. I've been like struggling for like months with the writing. It's like I had all these pages of scenes of stuff in the store, but didn't have anything pulling together. I was really frustrated. And he was like, didn't you talk once about a succession plot? And then suddenly this idea came to me of how to make it work. And so what I said a lot was this idea that I'd have center a group of workers who did the same job I did. I talked about unload the truck in the morning. Be about the group. What happens is they have a bad boss, but like an annoying boss, a self-involved, incompetent boss. She's not evil, she's just annoying. But she's like kind of driving them nuts and making the job less fun. Then they find out that Big Will, the store manager, is being promoted to a new store and he's leaving. And someone internal is going to be promoted to fill his spot. And corporate's going to come to decide who. And they know that Meredith, their annoying manager, really, really wants that job. Their first impulse is, we hate her, so we should sabotage her attempt. But then one of them gets an idea. What if we help her get promoted? Because then we'll get her off our backs. She's not going to be coming in at 4 a.m. anymore. She doesn't have to. She's our manager. She'll come in normal hour. And also, if she got promoted, a lower level manager, Little Will, would get promoted and it would open up a slot for one of them to get a management job. And a management job means a guaranteed 40 hours a week, guaranteed benefits, would be life-changing for any of them. So they band together to plot to get their incompetent boss promoted, make her look brilliant in the eyes of corporate. So that's what the book is about. And I'm gonna stop in 1 second. I'll just say I like that because I felt like it allowed me to show that the characters have like agency and humor and they strategize and I thought that was important. I just didn't want to write a book. I guess now I'm repeating myself because I went off the notes. That is just about them as victims because I wanted to get that sense of fun and creativity reflected in the book. But I also wanted to foreground their economic lives and the idea of how much getting this promotion to a low-level management job means to them. I felt it was a way to keep that in the forefront while writing a book that hopefully is fun. I think maybe this is a good place to stop if anyone has questions. Elliot?
So I remember talking to you when you were like still working with the big box store and sort of starting to think about this book. And I remember thinking even then that it felt radical to write fiction about work because I feel like we talked about this. There's not enough fiction about work. I just think there's a lot of writers who've never done anything but write and teach, and so they like don't, and so to me, it feels really radical that it's not just that you did research and wrote a book about work, it's fiction about work. So can you talk a little bit about that aspect?
Oh, I love that. Right, because at times, even I thought sometimes when I started that maybe to go with memoir or fiction that was almost like memoir, like a novel that would be about a middle-class person getting a job for various reasons and then observing the characters. But I realized pretty quickly that I didn't want to do that because what it would do was it felt like foreground my observations. And I actually felt like that was just a lot less interesting to me than the world itself. Like it you know how there's like websites, this is still old, it's gonna date me, but you stuff white people like. And there's this whole like line of things in the culture that are kind of about sort of making fun of like educated upper middle class people's mores and tastes, and they're primarily enjoyed by educated upper middle class people because we enjoy seeing ourselves lampooned in this way. And I just felt like I didn't want to do that, like turn the book into like a comedy about cross class misunderstandings or the clueless upper middle class person. Not because I wasn't clueless, I was, and I did put my foot in my mouth. I think a few times I did, like when I was getting to know my coworkers. But I just somehow felt like that was less interesting to me. Like, you know, the fuck ups of Adele, or you know, I can share them in private. But sort of this fictional approach, I felt like allowed me to do more of what I actually found most moving, of foregrounding, like trying to sort of realistically capture the kind of people who work there and not idealize them, but also I think that the culture is sometimes actually so eviscerating to people like the people I worked with, and something my coworkers knew very well, like how much contempt they were held in as retail workers. This idea that you were like just a stoner or slacker and you're poor because you failed somehow. And it was heartbreaking because they worked so hard. Like in the 6 months I was at the store, the only person who quit was me. My coworkers were very reliable, very hardworking. We started our shift at 4, but I learned early on people would get there at 3:45 because they wanted to put their stuff away and be ready to clock in at 5 up, because corporate would let you clock in 5 minutes before your shift started. Everybody wanted to be there in order to get the extra 5 minutes of pay. People were so reliable and so hardworking, and it really did, and it cut against certain stereotypes that are a little oppressive for the people who are more than a little oppressive and unfair to people living this reality. So I don't know, I felt like the best way to do it was just take myself out of it. So, anyone else?
Ready for more questions?
So does the big box store know about your book and the people who you were working with?
The people, so there's 2 questions, so it's like slightly complicated. So my coworkers do. So my policy, I actually did even go to journalism school weirdly once for somebody who wanted to be a fiction writer, but I didn't know, I don't know if there's rules for how to do this ethically, but when I told myself when I went in, if I wasn't gonna lie, so when I applied for jobs, I filled out the applications accurately. I said I was a mom and I was looking for something part-time that I could do while I was taking care of my daughter. This was true, but I put that I'd gone to graduate high school. I put that I'd gone to college. There was no question of like previous books published on the application. And so it was important to me not to lie. But as I got to know my coworkers and after some false starts, I just came to really, really like, not every single person I worked with, but a few of us. There's this core group. And I really wanted them to like me because it just did. It felt like high school, and I felt like I was like laid bare without some of the things that as you grow up, I think is middle class people, you acquire more professional status. Maybe that these things can be like armor. They help you in your interactions with people. You can describe your job, and I didn't have any of that with them. I wasn't a writer. I was just this person, and I'm kind of a dorky person. My frame of reference would be 19th century novels, and we're not going to win me any friends with most of my coworkers. So I feel like I but I could see some of them were just really funny. We did have an annoying boss and the way they had, certain people were really good at mimicking her. And I just, it's like high school. Like I want them to like me. I at one point baked banana bread and brought it in. That was really helpful. But I did eventually become close to a group of them. And as we got closer, I really need to tell them because I don't want them to feel betrayed. So I actually told them on election day of 2018, it was the midterm elections. And this was, I had started acting weird in the run up to the elections. My coworkers thought I was very concerned about those elections. I really, at that point, it seemed like Obamacare was in question. We lived in a swing district with that Republican congressman had been elected in 2016. And I started bringing in voter registration forms. I've offered to give people, like anyone, a ride to vote. So, but my coworkers knew like something was like I was a little too into the election. And then I said that on election day, anyone who voted, I would buy them a drink. We'd do like happy hour together at a bar. And so then I was really revealing when I had some more means, which to be honest, more than I realized, my coworkers knew because it was very obvious to them that my car, which I don't even think it's not a fancy car. It's a 2015 Toyota Prius, but it was fancier than a lot of the cars that my coworkers who had cars had. It has power windows and I can make my phone play podcasts through the car. It's a car that works and has air conditioning. So they already knew more than I realized, things that I didn't even notice. But on election day, we go to the bar and I told them, and it was like the core group. And they didn't believe me at first, but then one looked me up on her phone, found my first book, and was like, "Oh my god!" So, and then they were really excited and supportive, which I think is funny. Anyone who spent time in a like writerly heavy world or done an MFA program, I don't think in all circles this would go over well. If you were just like hanging out with a group of people for a few months and then someone was like, "Actually, I've been wanting to write a book about this whole experience the whole time." So is that cool? I think might feel offended. It was so unexpected. Like they just thought it was really neat. And then they started telling me stuff. And this was sort of mixed because I wasn't going to ask my coworkers, like, tell me about your childhood. Where it's like, but suddenly they wanted to tell me about their lives. And I was like, okay, this is hard because the stuff they told me was really interesting and often just almost 100% richer and more textured than anything I would have imagined for my like liberal but privileged mindset, or I'd have imagined things that are just overly simple and sentimental. But the stories, their lives are really rich and interesting. But then it became a challenge of like, how can I incorporate some of this without doing it in a way that would violate their privacy? And so that was like, be careful what you tell me. But so by then, so all my coworkers knew, and then our manager found out. But he didn't really care. But I never officially like told the higher ups. Like, so I still don't know what the store. I like every day. Like, am I gonna come home to a what is it you get when you're sued? Yeah, summons. I've heard it's a very litigious company, so we'll see.
But you did name them in the book.
I didn't.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the New York
Norton do a
Times.
legal read?
My publisher did a legal read, but the New York Times did name the company in an article, which it might have been. Yeah, it just happened. But what can you do? I don't know. I mean. That's fine. So I try not to use the name too much, but I also don't want to be overly. I'm really not trying to protect them either. Anyone else?
You mentioned you mentioned Trump as part of the reason why you went. And so I was wondering and then you talked about the 2018 election. Were politics something you all talked about and then connected, although I guess in some ways it doesn't seem connected, I know, I mean, there are no, except for Amazon, there are no retail places, the big box stores that are unionized. Was joining a union, was talking about a union and something anyone even
Yes,
So you-
yes, so I can maybe talk on both points. With my core group of coworkers I became close to, they really fell into the non-voter category in a really classic way. There was another group or small group, a couple of people who were into right wing talk radio, and so I sometimes argue with them. I enjoyed that. At that point, there's a time when I think things that now seem almost, it's so sad, like relatively harmless, seem new. But I remember just getting into it about whether John McCain was a war hero in spite of the fact that he was captured. But so there was some of that. There were people who were into it, but there was a lot, like the majority of the people I worked with, I'd say were more just non-voters. They and I had a lot of sympathy with where they're coming from. They felt like their lives and their work experience, because they've been working these kinds of jobs for years, had just steadily gotten worse. It didn't matter who was the Democrats or Republicans. I think I could understand their cynicism of like, voting is for rich people. It's all about making the world better for rich people. It has nothing to offer me. And I tried to like make a case for Obamacare, which did things important, and some people didn't realize they had access to it, which they do in New York State. So there's a lot of just general cynicism and nihilism, and then plus voting is hard for people without card. There's so much that's hard about it. And people have been a little bit like, interactions with the government can be a little off-putting if your primary interactions are when you have to show up every year for a meeting about your food stamp cards. It's like everything about just register. It's just funny how something as simple as me bringing in voter registration forms and doing it with some of my coworkers just made it easier. Like they were perfectly willing to vote, but they just didn't really want to make the effort to do it themselves. And then I thought it was really interesting. Trying not to be too like preachy about my own politics with them, because I felt like it wasn't quite like if I'm offering to drive people to vote, I don't want to only drive people who are voting the way I wanted. Although I didn't really make an effort to get those three guys who are in the right wing, right? I was like, you should have ride. But where's it going with this? I thought I really enjoyed some of the political conversations I had with my coworkers. One in particular, the Democratic candidate who's running for Congress in our district against the Republican. The Democrat is a black man, and the Republican candidate had run an ad that was designed to trigger the race. Like it was intended to trigger people. Yeah, right. And this area is largely rural, and it basically featured the black candidate like rapping when he was younger. And I had one of my coworkers, she was someone who looked like a classic Trump voter. It just demographically hadn't finished, started community college, hadn't finished, was in his late 30s, like a white man, unmarried. And I just remember him saying that he saw the sort of racist Republican commercial, and it just made him want to vote for the black guy because he loves rap. It was like, how cool, I want a politician who raps. And I just thought it was really interesting, like to see something like that backfire. And I don't know if that's why the Democrat won, but so my coworkers had assorted politics. I've long continued to think that politicians should spend more time hanging out outside big box stores during the hours in which workers go on break, though, because I think there's just a lot of people who would really be flattered to have people talk. People want to talk about them, about their ideas and thoughts. I just feel like so many of my coworkers, no one seemed to ever have made an effort. You know, it's like, why did it mean so much for me to bring in voter registration forms? And I'm just surprised at how little experience people taking an interest in what they thought. Oh, the second question, unionization. Because one way I get this question is often like, why didn't I write the book about an effort of the workers to unionize? And that answer I'll give, which was, I thought about it, but it felt just not novelistic. It felt too black and white. And I felt there's wonderful movies about union efforts. Has anyone seen Madeline? It's called a film about coal miners in West Virginia. I think it's the 1920s. It's brutal. It's a really, really good movie, but you have to have some really good skills to take something that's really a black and white issue. You have the good guys, the workers, the bad guys, the company, and make it into art. And I think that movie succeeded. I didn't think I could could do that. So I felt like I needed to come at it sort of from an angle to, like, I hope no one would read this book. Like, I think if you read the book, you come away feeling like these workers should unionize. I am more pro-union than I was before I read this book. Like, I certainly feel that way, and I think that's a takeaway from the book, but it's more indirect. But one thing I thought was really interesting was when unions came up with my close group of coworkers, there were a few things. There was a sense of fear because people had gotten fired for talking to union organizers if they were on the platform. You can't get fired for talking to a union organizer in your off hours, but no one was ever fired for time theft unless you spent 2 minutes while you were on shift talking to a union organizer. Then the store would be known to fire people. So there was a sense of fear. And then a sense that whenever union organizers were afoot, the company would hold those captive audience meetings and give a spiel about why unions were bad and talk about how that unions would take a cut of their paychecks, whereas we're so generous, look at the ways in which we're so much better than other employers, and that if we unionize, you're going to lose these wonderful, generous things we give you of our own volition. And it was surprisingly effective, I think, there just wasn't enough to counter it. And so it's not that my coworkers believed it entirely, but I think they were so cynical, like no one had ever done much to help them. And this idea that a union was just another group that wanted to take part of their paycheck had a certain ring of truth. So, and this was 2018, I should say. I do think the climate has changed and the filter has changed, but I felt like what I saw was just how much uphill work there is to do, because I think how much these sort of anti-union messages have permeated our culture, I think, in the past 40 years or so, as the rate of unionization has declined so much. And I think that there's this anti-union narrative that many of us bought into, and I think many, middle class and upper middle class people have also bought into it. Like there was this narrative about how unions were great in their day, but they don't make sense in the knowledge economy, and the best thing for these workers to do is just to go to college. Like this idea that any low-wage job is just a temporary job for someone just on their way to something else, which is really total bullshit when you think about it. Like, can you imagine if we told the coal miners in the 1920s, like, the solution to your problem is to go to college and get another job? Like, what would have happened to our country if that had been the response rather than making the jobs better? But we live in a world where we rely on the labor of a lot of people who work very hard, and somehow to find this justification, like we should pay them poverty level wages that make their lives impossible because somehow we're just giving them incentive to go to college. It's like, I find it very convoluted. But along with saying, I think and hope that Mr. is becoming a little more favorable.
I'm going to, thank you. I'm going to interrupt it. This seems like an opportune pause. Do you need some water? Are you good? First of all, I'd like to thank Adelle so much. I'm looking at a picture of Hillary. Thank you so much, Adelle. This was really, really interesting. And so